Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Quick reminder, support the broadcast. Become a paid subscriber on Substack, $5 a month, $50 a year or more. We do private weekly Zooms every week or two, just shooting the breeze in current events. I also compile the week's news with a brief commentary every week for paid subscribers only. And on occasion, we bring back past podcast guests to do a live Q&A with paid subscribers only. You can also donate through Wise Donor Box, buy me a coffee and other platforms, and purchase a consultation if you want to chat with me about anything, geopolitics, expatriation, the meaning of life, and whatnot. And do check out this month's sponsor, Mikhail Thorup's Expat Money Summit, taking place October 7th to 11th online. I watch it every year. The live stream is free, and every day is available. It's available for free for 24 hours. After that, you do have to upgrade and get the VIP ticket. If you decide to do that, use the promo code EMPIRE. That'll get you $100 off the VIP tickets. There will also be VIP panels. I'll be on one of them discussing World War III. Others like Alex Craner and Tom Luongo will be participating in other panels. And the summit deals with internationalization, basically investing in foreign real estate, getting residencies, second or third passports, and that sort of stuff. The sort of things you might want to do to prepare for the coming New World Order, Great Reset, global dystopia. And most of the headline speakers have been guests of mine on the podcast: Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Mark Faber, and others. So check out the sponsor and my affiliates: Legal Shield, Wise Wolf Gold, Above Phone, EasyDNS.com, and leave a podcast review if you haven't by now. Returning to the transmission is Nikola Mikovic, who's a freelance journalist, researcher, and analyst based in Serbia. He covers foreign policies of Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and energy-related issues. He focuses primarily on Russia's involvement in the post-Soviet space, the Middle East, and the Balkans. He writes for a host of publications, including Byline Times, CGTN, Lowy Institute, Global Comments, World Geostratregic Insights. In the past, he has contributed to Geopolitics and Empire. Dobrodošao ponovo u emisiju, Nikola.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be on your show again.
It's been a while. Great to have you on. I see you've been traveling the planet, yes? How's that been?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I went to participate in several conferences in Central Asia and in other former Soviet republics. So yeah, I traveled a lot this year. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, you've been on my old stomping grounds. You were in Kazakhstan recently. I hope you had some good bishabarmak. And the first topic of the day, before I get to that topic and your latest piece, I just want to put out a disclaimer there for the snowflakes out there, people getting triggered. I am anti-NATO. I'm an EU citizen, and I have the right to be anti-NATO, anti-EU, anti-American empire and U.S. foreign policy, anti-City of London and the British eugenicist global agenda. That does not mean I am pro-Russia or pro-BRICS or pro-multipolarity. I am pro-freedom, liberty, leaving people alone, anti these globalist totalitarian things that all states are participating in. So getting that out of the way, the not war in Ukraine. Your latest piece is titled "Ukraine's Kursk Offensive is Vladimir Putin's Emperor Has No Clothes Moment." It's the first occupation of Russian territory since the Second World War, and it's created a myriad of problems for Putin. And that also basically overlaps with the latest contribution to Geopolitics and Empire by David Shkripach, who's a Canadian Air Force veteran who penned a piece discussing Putin's Potemkin village. And I publish stuff. I have guests on that I've had the Scott Ritters on and the Doug McGregors, right? I've got people with different points of view, and I'm trying to make sense of everything, but I'm trying to be realistic as well. It doesn't look like things are going great for the collective Kremlin versus NATO. So what are your thoughts with the latest when it comes to Kursk, Ukraine, Russia?
No, you're wrong, Corway. You don't get it. this is all part of Putin's cunning plan. You just don't understand it. So the point is, Russia allowed Ukraine to capture significant parts of the Kursk region, and I'm sure they can just move on. And it's not impossible that they will capture some parts of other Russian regions and even reach the outskirts of Moscow. So that's the cunning plan. And after that, they will all be eliminated. So, of course, that will be the pro-Kremlin narrative. It has nothing to do with reality. I was joking. In reality, this is a huge debacle that Russia suffered. In the past, it's suffered a lot of humiliations in Ukraine, but this one seems to be the most serious debacle, because Putin allowed his opponent, he allowed Ukraine to occupy certain parts of the Russian Federation. And he actually sent a very bad message to his own people, and also sent a message to potential Russian opponents that they can also do what Ukraine did to occupy other parts of Russia, and there will be no serious reaction from the Kremlin. So that's the major consequence of this Ukrainian offensive. You probably remember that I wrote about that in my articles, even for Geopolitics and Empire, and we discussed all that in 2022 on TNT radio and last year and so on. But I think your listeners were not ready to understand that. 2 years ago, they didn't quite get my point. But I think now even the dumbest pro-Kremlin propagandist and troll can see perfectly well that the emperor has no clothes, and that Russia is extremely weak, and that Ukraine has capacity to capture parts of the Russian Federation. I'm sure that Ukraine has capacity to capture not just the Kursk region, but other Russian regions. The only reason why it's not doing that is because it does not seem to have the green light from the United States. And the problem for Russia here, as I said, is that sooner or later other Russian neighbors could follow the pattern and do what Ukraine did. Because now it's quite clear that Russia cannot protect itself. It's clear that its allies are not willing to get involved in this war and side with Russia. Because according to the Article 4 of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO members would have to intervene and protect Russia. It's founding member of this organization, but they're not doing that because they don't want to get involved in Putin's Ukraine adventure. Even Belarus is doing nothing about this, which is very interesting. And Ukraine decided to launch this operation only after Alexander Lukashenko withdrew Belarusian troops from Belarusian border with Ukraine. And I don't think he did that without having tacit approval from the Kremlin. So now the situation for Russia is very bad. Ukraine does not control the Kursk city itself, but it controls significant portion of the territory, which represents a huge humiliation for Moscow. And now the Kremlin will have to do something about this. They're trying to spin all this and to portray this as something not particularly important. And the fact that Putin does not want to describe it as an act of aggression or invasion, even though this is Ukraine's response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but it doesn't matter. This is an invasion of a sovereign country. But Putin is not willing to admit it and to portray it that way, but he's using some other terms like this is a large-scale provocation, a terrorist attack, or something like that. So he does not want to raise the stakes, obviously, because then he will have to declare the state of war, and he will have to fight the war against Ukraine, which is what he refuses to do. Instead, he is conducting the so-called special military operation. Now, we could say that Ukraine is doing the same thing. This is a Ukrainian version of the special military operation on the Russian soil. And Ukraine's been pretty successful so far because it captured significant parts of the Kursk region, more than Russia captured in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. And I think now Russia will have to do something. And knowing the Kremlin's modus operandi, I'm pretty sure that it will wait until Ukraine fortifies those territories that it captured, and then it will use its well-known suicidal frontal assault military tactics, storming those villages and towns under Ukrainian control. As a result, a lot of Russian soldiers will die, but the Kremlin does not care about that anyway. Never did. I think sooner or later Russia will recapture that territory, unless this is all part of some kind of behind-the-scenes deal, so like a land swap deal. If Russia allows Ukraine to capture the Kursk nuclear power plant, then, as I explained in my articles, then probably it will have to withdraw its troops from the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, like a land swap deal. Although I don't rule out another option, that Ukraine will sooner or later launch another military operation in some other direction, maybe in the Zaporizhia region, maybe in Belgorod or elsewhere. And Kiev will then put the Kremlin in an even more difficult position. But so far, the situation is extremely difficult for Moscow because, according to recent polls, like 80% of the population in Russia, they support Putin. Frankly, I don't buy it, especially people living in Kursk and Belgorod. I don't think they're quite happy about the way Putin rules the country. But yeah, there are people, of course, who still support Putin, but I don't think at this point they make up the majority of the population, because I spoke with people living in Russia, and they told me that most Russians actually are just not interested about what's going on there, because Putin, he effectively killed political life in Russia, and people feel so powerless, and they don't care about all this anymore. I think they couldn't care if Ukrainian troops would enter Moscow tomorrow. They just want this agony to end one way or another. You know, they often say it's better to have horrible end than to have a never-ending horror. What people living in Kursk and Belgorod have now is a never-ending horror, also in Donetsk and in other parts of Ukraine and in Russia as well. So all this is very bad for Russia. We will see how it will end. I don't rule out another option, that's NATO troops eventually entering the Russian Federation, because, as I said, Putin now gave them the green light to do so. Why wouldn't countries like Estonia or Latvia do the same? I don't think they have capacity to seize the St. Petersburg. I don't think that's their plan, because they would have to feed millions of people there. Why would they do that? But some kind of provocation is quite possible. And that's the result of Putin's so-called special military operation in Ukraine. And I want to point out, Russian media talk a lot about all this, and they blame foreign powers, NATO, George Soros, Bill Gates, the Pope of Rome, who they're all responsible for this, but the only one who's not responsible is Vladimir Putin. And in reality, he is the one who is responsible for this debacle. Putin, General Valery Gerasimov, and General Lapin, who was in charge of this section of the front line, because it's very interesting that Russia, a country that's been at war with Ukraine for 2 years, did absolutely nothing to protect its border with Ukraine. I don't think it happened by accident. Nothing in politics happens by accident. For some reason, Russia allowed Ukraine to do this. Now, we will see what's the plan, if it's a land swap or something else, to reach some kind of ceasefire deal and to end this conflict for now, or something else, we will see. But in any case, this Ukrainian offensive had a very negative impact on Vladimir Putin and his rule in Russia. And in the future, I think his approval ratings will continue to decline. But the problem for Russia is that there is no organized political force that can overthrow Putin. And even if there's some kind of protest there, break out the Rosgvardia and the FSB, they can always crack down on those protesters. They have capacity to do that. They cannot fight against Ukraine, but they can fight against Putin's political opponents for sure. So the situation for Russia is pretty bad.
And just on that note, sort of what comes to mind for me is this sort of this worship cult. People who worship what is perceived to be this strong leader of Putin. I was just thinking the other day, like I've got 3 presidents in 3 countries, and I don't have anything good to say about them. And again, so I don't understand in the online sphere this sort of these people who get so butthurt when I publish on my website, different views on Putin and BRICS and multipolarity, and I just view, it's more of this anarcho-capitalist. I don't have labels for myself. I'm only a Christian. That's it. But this anarchist perspective where the state in general, at this point in history in particular, has become a great evil, and basically they're just all these corrupt oligarchies now, and just in Mexico, my outgoing Mexican president López Obrador, AMLO, I've said that he's a globalist, but he's done some good things, but he really irked me the other day. He came, a journalist was asking him about the security situation in Mexico, and he's like, "Oh, you must be a DEA agent. Nothing's happening. Everything's fine," says AMLO. Meanwhile, I'm reading the papers. By the way, Nikola, did you know a Croatian was found dead in Mexico last week? A 27-year-old Croat was found dead, probably whacked by the narcos. Yesterday, I read another mayor or politician was found dead in a ditch, and the Mexican government's covering it up. They said, "Oh, it was a car crash." And there's reports that the Mexican government is helping cartels, drone bomb Mexican citizens and pillage. So it's just like this idea that why would I be running cover for AMLO? I'm like, dude, like, you're crazy. The journalist is not a DEA agent. I'm not a DEA agent. The whole country, it's like so many bad things are happening in Mexico, and he's just sweeping it under the rug. And that kind of that's an example of what you're talking about with Putin too. No, like the things are not going well, and it's just being swept under the rug. The Russian media, RT, whatever, the multipolaristas are, it's 5D chess, right? The Xenons. Of course. And I wanted to read, by the way, I wanted to mention, there's a great tweet from Marko Marjanovic who said, would you agree with him? We've reached the point where the Americans are doing everything in the Russo-Ukrainian war that they want to do. Russian deterrence has become irrelevant. There's nothing you can point to and say Americans want to do this, but they fear provoking Russia.
Well, I think there are certain factions within the U.S. establishment that would like to end this war by completely humiliating Russia and having a breakup of the Russian Federation as the outcome of this war. But I don't think they make up the majority of those politicians in the U.S. I think they're a minority at this point. I think the mainstream faction wants Russia not to suffer a defeat, maybe, but not to achieve any of its goals in Ukraine. But that does not mean that they will allow Ukraine to win in a way that Kiev would like to win, like reclaiming all those territories that are currently under Russian control. So it's quite possible that as a result of this war, there will be a border dispute between the two countries, and maybe it will not be resolved during our lifetime. But what's happening now is something that many people couldn't imagine, but not myself. I could, and I announced that in my articles last year and in 2022 also. And even before that, years before that, I wrote an article in which I said that Vladimir Putin represents a force that effectively seeks to destroy not Ukraine, but the Russian Federation itself. Now, try to imagine, for instance, Hezbollah invading northern Israel. How would Israel respond? Well, I'm pretty sure it would bomb Beirut, or at least southern Beirut, where Hezbollah major stronghold is. It would bomb it day and night. Now, Russia did not fire a single missile at Kiev. Now, I'm not saying Russia should do that, but that's what they announced many months and years ago. They said, if Ukraine does this, then we will strike the so-called decision-making centers in Kiev, blah, blah, blah. Nothing happened. To this day, Russia did not bomb a single bridge on the Dnieper River in Ukraine. It's interesting, but they didn't even bomb bridges in the Kursk region either. So they allowed Ukraine to enter there. There's a lot of very strange things going on in Russia and in this war in general. But Russia continues demonstrating its weakness on a daily basis, and it's very hard to hide it now. And if you see now comments below this video from people saying things like, "Oh, this guy is a NATO shill. Putin he knows what he's doing. It's not true," trying to justify Putin's actions, then you can be quite sure that whoever writes that is either a propagandist, a troll, or just knows absolutely nothing about politics and the way that this world operates. Russia again demonstrated that it is not a major power, because a major power would not allow anyone to invade parts of its country, to effectively occupy parts of its territory. That's what Ukraine did. And I think now Russia will have a hard time recapturing those towns and villages. It will probably have to bomb them and to destroy them completely, just like it did in the Donbass. So it's also very interesting that when Russia launches a military operation in the Donbass, then aiming to seize some completely insignificant, from the military perspective, towns, then it has to destroy those towns to level them to the ground. But when Ukraine captures or recaptures territory, then there's basically no fight, because Russian troops just withdrew, or they're not there. So they allow Ukraine to finish the job. Now it's up to your listeners to draw conclusions whether this is happening by chance or it's or if it's part of someone's cunning plan or something. But generally, the point is, Ukraine has capacity to move on, and I'm sure it will. And eventually Russia will have to do something, but as I explained in my articles, it will most likely be some kind of a half measure, because Putin is the king of half measures and also the king of empty threats. So he will threaten to bomb Kiev or do something. I think he might eventually bomb the so-called decision-making centers in Kiev. In reality, they're just empty administrative buildings. And it will be yet another demonstration of Russian weakness, because if he destroys the Ukrainian Defense Ministry headquarters, that will not change the situation on the ground. Ukraine will still have troops in Kursk. And also, there is another option that Ukraine could use, and I'm surprised. I wrote about that in 2022, and I'm surprised that to this day, Ukraine still hasn't, together with Moldova, attacked Transnistria, which is another very important region. It's a Moldova's breakaway region that's effectively under Russian control. Russia has like 2 battalions there. And Ukraine and Moldova could easily capture that region and defeat the Russian Federation, humiliate it. But they're not doing that. So it must be also part of some kind of behind-the-scenes deal. But in the future, it's possible that Ukraine will do that, because now it's quite clear that Russia will do nothing. And all those stories about Russia's alleged red lines are just empty threats. Russia does not have any red lines. Even when Ukraine captured the town of Suja in Kursk region, that town is strategically important because it's a major gas hub. But Russia did absolutely nothing about it. And to this day, it continues exporting gas to Europe through Ukraine. Sooner or later, it will be quite clear to everyone that the Russian military is a paper tiger. I think it does have capacity to fight, but there is no political will for that. unlike in Kiev. This operation, I'm pretty sure, boosted Ukrainian morale, which was pretty low because not many people in Ukraine were willing to fight, and Ukraine declared general mobilization recently, but people were not willing to go and to die fighting in the Donbass or in southern Ukraine. But now, after they saw that they can defeat Russia and occupy parts of the Russian Federation, I'm sure some of them will decide to join the Ukrainian army and fight against Russia. So that's another result of this Ukraine's operation in Russia's Kursk region.
Let me read a quick quote from a former Indian diplomat, MK Badra Kumar from IndianPunchline.com. And he's in the camp of multipolarista. Okay. So it's bad when your own side, multipolaristas, the pro-BRICS, the hyper-pro-BRICS multipolar group is pointing this out, agreeing with you, Nikola. And let me just read this. He writes this the other day. He says, as the Ukrainian incursion into Russia's Kursk region rolls on, war conditions have appeared in Russia for the first time since the Second World War. It's a stunning experience that an estimated 180,000 people have become internally displaced. Ukrainian military was apparently gasping for breath per Russian narrative. But Ukrainian mastery of combined arms warfare is on display and impressive, deploying everything from air defense to electronic warfare and armor and infantry. Ukraine made its point that it's capable of mounting a combined arms assault and bring some pain to Russians. And here's the kicker that Badra Kumar, multipolarista, recognizes. He says, quote, the best spin that pro-Russian analysts could think of is that the Kremlin had set a trap actually, so that Ukraine's soldiers could once again be put into the meat grinder. It's his hogwash. It's impossible to cover up the naked truth that Russian military has been caught with its pants down. So that's Badra Kumar, former Indian diplomat, multipolarista himself, recognizing, come on, let's be objective here, people. And ever since David Skripac's article was so it's funny, as soon as I posted that article by David Skripac discussing Putin's actions in this war as being Potemkin, the next day the slew of headlines basically confirmed that analysis. So some people got triggered by that message. They said they're unsubscribing from the podcast or whatever. Look, I don't care. For me, that's childish behavior. Take it or leave it. I listen to a whole bunch of stuff that I disagree with. I've never, if I don't like it, I don't like it. Big deal. But I'd never go to someone and say, hey, I'm unsubscribing from you. But anyways, just look at the headlines that were posted after that article on Geopolitics and Empire. You've got it's saying Russia building trenches in Kursk to defend against Ukrainian advances. RT says, reports that more NATO members endorsed Ukraine's attack on Russia. Prime ministers of Finland and Estonia have voiced their support for the Ukrainian attack on Russia's Kursk region. Ukraine reports largest surrender by Russian troops of the war. Moscow orders 20,000 more evacuations in Kursk. On and on it goes, and that's confirming the analysis. So I think the whole point here, Nikola, is look, we're trying to be realistic to that shows that we're onto the truth, and we're doing good analysis, and then we can sort of extrapolate future events accurately, which is what is happening, right? We're not living in fantasy land. And I do want to ask you just this thought of a third world war. We've talked about this before, and it seems like you don't think it's going to escalate. You've sort of given your prognosis of where things will go. Do you think there's any chance? And if it does get to World War III, I would probably blame Washington, Brussels, London, because I think they would be the first that want to go there, not Moscow. And any thoughts on that worst case scenario?
I think that's very unlikely, at least at this point. Because the Kremlin is not willing to raise the stakes. If Russia refuses to strike the so-called decision-making centers in Kiev, why do you think it would risk striking London, Washington, and other places where the Kremlin's officials' children and grandchildren live and study? Why would they kill their own children, grandchildren? I don't think that's going to happen. Even if NATO troops enter Russia, I don't expect serious escalation, because, as I said, there is no political will in the Kremlin to fight this war seriously. Now, I'm not saying they should bomb London or something. I'm just trying to predict what will happen next based on what happened in the past. If I take this and I do like this, and 15 times, 20 times, and I do this 100 times, the result will be the same. So if Putin never seriously responds to the so-called provocations, then why would I expect him to do that in future? I don't. I think he will have to do something, as I said. But what the Kremlin is doing now is basically preparing the Russian population for a potential conflict with NATO, but that conflict will be on Russian soil. So they openly now, pro-Kremlin propagandists now openly say that it will take months for Russia to recapture that territory that's now under Ukrainian control. So people in Russia will have to adapt to the new reality in which foreign military controls part of the Russian Federation. So that was the so-called red line that they crossed. So in the future, other countries could cross another red line, like I said, Baltic countries, maybe Finland, and then they could occupy parts of the Russian Federation. And for the Russian people, it will not be a big deal, because they got used to it already, because Ukraine now controls parts of Russia. So what's the big deal? I mean, we already have that on our territory. So it's very dangerous for the Russian people. And I understand why the level of apathy in the Russian society is so high, because there's nothing they can do about this. Because, as I said, Putin has killed political life in Russia. Now he's banning YouTube, and bloggers who have more than 10,000 subscribers, they have to get registered to provide their name and all details. So basically, he wants to prevent anyone who wants to criticize the way he conducts the so-called special military operation, in reality, an invasion of Ukraine. But it's not improbable that sooner or later there will be some new Wagner force, or maybe parts of the Russian regular military, who will try to overthrow Putin. I'm not sure if they will be successful, because Putin is firmly backed by General Valery Gerasimov, who controls Russian military, and Sergei Shoigu is also there. I think he's actually still in charge of the Russian Defense Ministry, even though now Russia nominally has a new defense minister, Belarus. But I think Shoigu is the one who's still in charge, actually, because if you pay attention, you will see that he attends all the crucial meetings. He's always with Putin. He travels to other countries to negotiate arms sales deals, and so he's still a pretty powerful actor there. And Putin is still supported by the so-called security apparatus, Siloviki, in Russia. So at this point, I don't think he has to worry. But in the future, it's possible that someone will try to overthrow him. But from the Western perspective, it would be the best option that Putin stays in power until the war is over, because having Putin in charge of the Kremlin is a sure guarantee that Russia will not achieve any of its goals in Ukraine. That's what I would do if I were a policymaker in Washington. I would just make sure that someone like Putin is in power in Russia. Because imagine someone who wants to escalate and wants to fight seriously comes to power in Russia, then it would be things could escalate, and the situation could become unpredictable, and that's the last thing you want. It's much better this way, because you have General Gerasimov, who constantly holds talks with his American partners in Washington, with General Milley. They coordinate their actions. I'm pretty sure about that. And when Ukraine attacked Russia's Kursk region, then Russian Defense Minister Belarus, he reportedly called his American partners, but they refused to discuss that with Russia. which also makes sense. I mean, why would they? Russia demonstrated that it's extremely weak. And as Putin said in 2004, the weak get beaten. So that's what's happening now. Russia is weak, and Ukraine is just using the opportunity to achieve its goals. I also want to point out this. From the military perspective, what Ukraine did perfectly makes sense, because the alternative was to attack the Donbass or southern Ukraine that's under Russian control. And it would be another big mistake. Ukraine already made that mistake last year when it launched its counteroffensive in the Zaporizhia region, and it suffered severe losses as a result of that operation. So it decided to attack the territory of the Russian Federation, knowing quite well that Russia does not have enough troops there, because Putin refuses to declare a nationwide mobilization. So Ukraine, from its perspective, did a good job. Unlike Russia, you remember in 2022, after Russia attempted to seize Kiev, and it failed. And then I had a debate with an editor of a newspaper I worked with at the time. He told me that Russia never actually planned to seize Kiev. It was all of Maskirovka, which I disagreed with, of course. Sergei Shoigu then said that Russia planned to focus on the Donbass instead. So now, when you fight the war, normally you want to deceive your opponent. So if you say we will attack the Donbass, then you will probably attack somewhere else, not in the Donbass, right? You want to confuse your opponent. But no, Shoigu did exactly what he promised. So he attacked Ukrainian positions in Donbass, and those positions are well fortified. Ukraine had 10 years to fortify those positions. And now Russian troops continue suffering serious losses on a daily basis, storming insignificant villages and towns. So Ukraine obviously does not want to do that. Instead, it attacked Russian territory, and it made significant progress. So that's the situation we have at this point.
Yeah, and what you mentioned earlier about Russians becoming, apathy setting in, that happens anywhere, in any war situation or in any dystopia or authoritarian regime. Again, it's a lot of these. I'm using Mexico as an example because it's the same across the board. There's apathy in some ways here in Mexico with the narco situation and the war in Mexico, where so many people are dying, just as you're explaining in Russia and elsewhere. And I found the strangest thing, what you mentioned, Nikola, not just with Russia and Ukraine, but with Iran and Israel, these telegraphing of every move. It's like World Wrestling Federation, right? Where in this age of instant communication, it's the strangest things. Like if a real war is going on, Iran or Russia or whatever, they're not going to be like, we're going to strike on this day here. And you think of World War II, Normandy D-Day, that operation. The West was sending all sorts of disinformation to make the Germans think that something was going to happen from the Mediterranean or from Spain, but no, it came from the north. And today it's just like, okay, tomorrow we're going to strike at 8:05 a.m. And it's like, what is going on? I don't understand this type of warfare. It's like, I if I were Shoigu or someone, I wouldn't even be speaking to the press, and I would just be doing what I need to do. No communication with the media, and we're going to do what we need to do. It's the strangest thing. And I did also want to, before moving on, just read one more thing. Some people criticize me for sharing in my Telegram. I share a lot of news stories from all different sources, from RT, from Western propaganda media. And I shared a Daily Beast article. I'm not a fan of Daily Beast. It's a libtard, left-wing globalist publication. But even sometimes, you have to be reading them to see what they're thinking. But a broken clock is right twice a day, right? They say, and sometimes they get it true. RT will say more true things about how things really are in the West, and some of these Western publications will speak more accurately, right, about what happens in Russia. And Daily Beast recently wrote, and Daily Beast was quoting the Russians themselves. And so I took this as valuable. It said even the Kremlin's paid liars. I wouldn't use that title because it's the same for the Western paid liars. including the Daily Beast. But even the Kremlin's paid liars are begging Putin to end the lies. And it says Moscow's reeling from Ukraine's bold counter invasion of Russia, which caught many people off guard. And it says the blowback is so severe that even pundits whose unspoken job description includes the ability to lie with abandon, they're now calling on Russia's mainstream media to start reporting a bit more truth. During Monday's broadcast of the meeting place on the NTV channel, Andrei Fedorov, a former Russian deputy foreign minister, didn't mince his words. He said, "For as long as we continue to live with headlines like the agony of the regime, we will keep losing because constant lies are coming from our side about the weakness of the Ukrainian army and all that it's lacking. Ukraine has approximately 20,000 men near the Belgorod region who can potentially participate." And the host, Andrei Norkin, replied, "The most repugnant thing is that we overestimate our strength and underestimate the enemy." I think this is very important because people are certainly asking, how could this have happened? Anyways, there's that. And I guess we can move on to another piece you've written on. I want to look at this.
If I may just, I read that article. It was written by a lady called Julia. I'm sorry, I forgot her last
Davis,
name.
probably. Julia Davis, I think.
Probably, I'm not sure. I know her from Twitter. She's doing a good job, actually. She's monitoring the Russian media and translating what they're talking about. And she's then discussing that. And basically, she's telling us what's happening in Russia. Her job is to present that to the Western audience. I watch Russian media myself, so I'm quite aware of what's happening there and what they're talking about. Unlike other journalists and analysts, I don't take all those Russian analysts and politicians seriously because I've been covering the situation in Russia for many, many years, and I know that they're all liars and that whatever they say, it's usually quite opposite. And when they promise to do something, it's almost certainly that they will not do that. They promised to bomb Kiev, to destroy the so-called decision-making centers that never happened, to respond to Ukraine's actions and so on, to bomb. You see, Dmitry Medvedev, he's constantly threatening to bomb London, Warsaw, and Western countries, but we shouldn't take all that seriously. I don't even take Vladimir Putin seriously because he's also a notorious liar. But as a journalist, I have to listen to his speeches. They're usually quite boring. And I believe I wrote an article for Geopolitics and Empire last year or so. I think it was called "Why Putin's Speeches Are So Boring." Essentially, Putin is not a politician. He never was. He is a typical Soviet-style apparatchik. When he came to power, he did not have any political experience because he never participated in Russia's political life. He never participated in any debates. If you look at his friend, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he is a politician because he was leader of the opposition party. Then he was mayor of Istanbul. He participated in Turkish political life, but Putin didn't. And when you listen to his speeches, you will just hear a lot of bureaucratic nonsense. So when people ask him to resolve some very basic issues, then his answer will be a typical clerk-style answer. Oh, send the official request to that department. So he's not a serious leader. He's essentially a clerk and an apparatchik, KGB apparatchik. And maybe that's one of the reasons why Russia has so poor performances. It does not have a good leader. Even Boris Yeltsin, in my opinion, was a better leader than Putin because if just these are the facts. When Yeltsin was in charge, Ukraine was in Russia's geopolitical orbit. Moldova was in Russia's geopolitical orbit. Georgia too. It is Putin who lost all those countries. It is Putin who shut down all Russian bases outside of the former Soviet space, except the one in Syria. And I think the only reason why that base still exists is because it allows Kremlin to fight the war in Syria on behalf of its dear Western partners, because when they need someone to fight against ISIS, Russian troops are there, Wagner is there. So Putin is the one who withdrew Russian forces from the Balkans. It is Yeltsin who deployed them. So I know that a lot of people see Yeltsin as an alcoholic who destroyed Russia, but in reality, it is Putin who's someone who's not successful at all, to put it that way. I'm not saying that Yeltsin was a successful leader, but it is Putin who made a lot of, I cannot say mistakes, because I think he's doing all that on purpose. I refuse to believe that he's stupid. I don't see Putin as someone who's stupid. I think he's doing that on purpose, and why, I still cannot explain that. And again, it's up to our listeners and viewers to draw conclusions.
But also, we have to bring up Yeltsin. There's a Time magazine piece from the 90s. Was it 95, maybe 93, discussing how basically, Clinton team was behind bringing Yeltsin into power. That was the beginning of sort of, the West raping Russia. I'm not as harsh as you are on Putin's speeches. I get your point. I do have to admit, though, when I have listened to him, he's seemed much more intelligent or informed than any Western leader when it comes to certain issues. And when the West, it's contrasting to Russia, when the West promises to bomb something, it does, right? Wesley Clark's prognosis that the U.S. would bomb 7 countries in the Middle East, and they've bombed most of them. So they have followed through on those promises. And the DragonBear, I want to ask you, the China-Russia strategic relationship, you recently wrote a good article about that. You said, quote, strategic planners in the Kremlin seem to have a tough choice to make: to accept Chinese terms and provide Beijing with natural gas at a very low rate, or attempt to reach a deal with Ukraine and the West, aiming to eventually renew gas sales to Europe. Whatever decision the Kremlin makes, it risks exacerbating Russia's economic difficulties and reshaping its geopolitical vector. Ultimately, the choice may be between being a Western vassal state or a client of China. And Riley Wagaman shared a piece from Russian media this morning on his Telegram, where it says payments to China from Russia are no longer going through, say Russian importers. The market is frantically looking for a way out of the stalemate and is trying out crypto and barter. But crypto is banned in China, and no one understands how barter will work. And so, again, that's not. It seems like all is not well in DragonBear land. What do you make of the relationship between Beijing and Moscow?
I wrote that article in the context of the ongoing Ukrainian offensive in Russia's Kursk region. So what I actually wanted to explain is that that article was basically related to the energy issues. So prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Europe was Russia's major market for Russian energy, gas, oil, and even coal. And then after Putin decided to launch this adventure in Ukraine, Europe stopped purchasing, not completely, but to a significant extent, Russian energy, although it is buying it indirectly through third parties, like from India. Russia is selling its oil to India, then India is selling it to Europe, and there are examples like that. But essentially, Europe found ways to reduce significantly its dependence on Russian energy. So now the problem for the Kremlin is that it needs to find new markets for its gas and oil. So it increased gas supplies to Central Asian countries and also to China, to India. It's selling oil to India as well. But all that cannot compensate losses that Gazprom, Russian energy giant, has in Europe, because this year Gazprom suffered serious financial losses as a result of the war in Ukraine and the fact that it lost its major market, which is Europe. So now the choice, as I said, is very hard for Russia. And I'm sure there are factions within the Russian elites that want to reach some kind of a deal with the West to to get things back to normal from their perspective, right? To continue selling gas and oil to the West. But I don't think that's going to work, because Russia will have to make some serious concessions to the West in order that the Western countries allow Moscow to begin exporting gas to the European Union. But anyway, I think that's what I would like to happen. In the meantime, they're trying to find new markets, and China is a potential market. But the problem for Russia is that China does not need that much Russian gas. Even if the Kremlin manages to build the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, that will not, it's basically a drop in the ocean if you compare it to the amount of gas that Russia used to sell to Europe. I think around 157 billion cubic meters of gas per year, I think, prior to the war in Ukraine. If Russia manages to build the Power of Siberia, it will sell like 50 billion cubic meters of gas to China, which is not enough to compensate Gazprom's losses. And China is not depending gas only from Russia. It has other suppliers. Turkmenistan is one of them. It's a very important country in this puzzle. And there are other countries too. But generally now what Beijing is trying to do, and it perfectly makes sense, China sees that Russia is now dependent on Beijing financially and from the energy perspective too, and it wants to get a cheap energy price. It already gets relatively cheap Russian gas. It's cheaper. Russia is selling gas to China at the rate that's much lower than the rate that Turkey has to pay, and other European countries. But Beijing is not satisfied with that. It reportedly wants to get a price that's the same as the price for Russian domestic market. And I think even Putin and other politicians in Moscow who are willing to make concessions, not just to the West, but to China as well, that they cannot simply make that one, because they would lose money. So that's the problem why for the Kremlin, and that's the reason why they still cannot begin building the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. And it remains to be seen if it will be built anytime soon, if at all. But generally, China managed to not only to find other gas producers to import gas from, but also to develop its green energy sector and it's also to a certain extent reduced its dependence on fossil fuels. And that's also a problem for the Kremlin, because Russian economy is still very dependent on energy sales. That's also another big problem for Moscow, because Russia is essentially a deindustrialized country, and it will take ages for Russia to develop its industrial base. Even if it begins doing that now, it will take ages. But I'm not sure if they're interested in such developments at all, because in the past Russia was importing all sorts of things from the West. Now they're doing that by importing from China. So they just replaced one importer with another, and it did not resolve their problems. During the Soviet era, the Soviet Union was producing basically everything, but Putin's Russia is not the Soviet Union. It's a capitalist society. They have a wild capitalism there, and performances are pretty bad, and that's another result of Putin's so-called special military operation in Ukraine.
China. There's another piece you wrote that caught my eye, and it's my favorite topic: the algorithm ghetto, the cyber gulag, the social credit system, the global dystopia, the technocracy. I was on Australian TV the other day discussing this, and what struck out to me is you were in China again, and you wrote, in China, living without smartphones, QR codes, and mobile apps is almost inconceivable. Technically, it is possible to use cash, but it's very likely that a seller will not be able to give you change as they don't have proper money in the register. In fact, they don't seem to have a register at all. Paying with a credit card can also be difficult, as many stores do not have payment terminals. I'm hearing from people, some parts in Europe, in the Netherlands, for example, I've heard that recently, 80% of places don't accept cash, that they literally say you can't use cash. For me, that's still so alien. I've lived all my life. I never used the physical card ever, just cash. In Mexico, I've been able to live with cash. In Croatia, I see in the US, it's getting worse. And this is important because I don't know how anyone can justify this. You've got the multipolitistas justifying this, saying it's good. How is it good if you give up all of your sovereignty and power to the state and to the corporations, both who have proven in time past to be maniacs, to be murderers? The same corporate, like IBM, who helped with with what was done to the Jews. Like, these are corporations that these big pharma corporations that knowingly sold drugs to people that were killing them, and some of us are already being deplatformed. How can this type of system be any good? It's convenient, but what happens when they remove the off ramps and the only form of payment is your phone? What if my phone gets stolen? I guess I don't get to eat that day. That happens. Your battery dies, or you become a dissident. You get shut off. So I still can't understand this statist way of thinking, where some people think this is a good thing. I don't even. My convenience is walking out of the house without a phone. I walk with cash in my pocket and no phone. So that means I won't be able to function in society. It's absolutely insane, Nikola. And I dread where we're going. I don't know what else to do. I just feel we're screwed because all countries are pushing this. Nothing is stopping it. What is your take on that and your experience from China?
That was the first time in my life that I went to a foreign country and I did not go to the exchange office or to a bank to exchange money. Normally, when I go to foreign countries, I bring cash and I go to exchange office or to a bank, and then I use local currency. But in China, it was pointless to do that. I mean, you can have cash and you can go to a store or to a restaurant and pay, but it's quite possible that they will not have enough change to give you because they just don't use cash. In Kazakhstan, it's pretty much the same, but the difference is that in Kazakhstan, you can pay with a credit card, but in China, you cannot even pay with a credit card. I mean, you can, but in most small stores and even restaurants, it's impossible because they don't have those machines. What you have to do is to have a local application and to connect your credit card with that app. And then when you want to pay, then scan your QR code or you scan their QR code, and that's how you pay. So that's what I had to do. I'm also a fan of cash because I'm generally an old-fashioned guy. And that was a totally new experience for me in China. But that's how things work there. And I spoke with a lot of people, and for them, they see it. It's not a big deal because in China there are a lot of technological innovations on a monthly basis or so. So they got used to it. That's how they operate. So I don't think anyone in China has a wallet because everything is on their phone. In Kazakhstan, it's pretty much the same. But in China, they don't see it as a problem because they say that that makes their lives easier. They don't have to have cash. They can just use the phone and so on. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just telling you what I experienced there. Another thing that I found unusual is that I had an issue with the airline. They lost my luggage and some other things, so I had to deal with local bureaucracy. It proved to be pretty efficient, to be honest. They resolved all the problems just by using 2 or 3 clicks on their phones. Then I had to buy some new clothes. And I went to shopping malls, but then there was a lot of shopping malls, a lot of stores, but they were all empty. There were sellers working there, but nobody was buying anything. And I wanted to buy something, but the clothes were extremely expensive. And then I asked my Chinese friends what to do. And they told me that that's not the way to do in China, that I should order clothes online. And I thought it would take days to get new clothes, and I needed it immediately. And then I ordered it. They helped me. Some Chinese guys there helped me. But the problem is that when you communicate with them, they don't speak English. The vast majority of the people don't speak English at all. So I had to use Google Translator. But another problem is that Google is blocked in China, as you know. So I had to install VPN. And the internet, as a result of the VPN, is pretty slow, especially those Western applications or websites. But we managed to communicate somehow, and then they helped me order the clothes. It took like less than an hour for me to get it. A robot brought it to my hotel room. So that's how things in China work. Everything is robotized, digitalized, and you can see cameras everywhere, basically, in villages, towns, and cities, and they're everywhere. When I landed at the airport, the first thing I had to do was to have my fingertips scanned, all of them, all 10. I found it strange, but then I spoke with Chinese living here in Serbia, and they told me that when they travel to the European Union, they have to follow the same procedure. Maybe, I don't know. When I go to the EU, I don't have to do that, but maybe it's for the Chinese. I just don't know. But they take security rules strictly, and they follow it. At every metro station, there are scanners. You have to pass through scanners to put your bag there, and so. But generally, I felt pretty safe over there. Now, from the technological perspective, I think what I saw in China is what we will have here in Serbia in about 15 years or so. I think in Croatia, they might have it in 10, in European countries, maybe in 5 or so. But I think it's inevitable. I think we will all have that QR codes and that kind of payment and all other measures. So again, I have to point out that I'm not an expert in China. I'm just telling you about my experiences from that country. When I write about China, I write most in the context of its relations with the Kremlin. But this was what you quoted was some kind of a travel blog I wrote for a certain publication. But in that piece, I explained how the system works in China. So it is pretty efficient. Whether it's good or bad, it's up to readers to draw conclusions.
The algorithm ghetto is inevitable. Mind blowing. Within an hour, your clothes are deployed by a robot. Again, my criticism: this is friendly fascism. It's all well and good. It's all and I know I don't disagree with you. It's I'm sure China is secure in that sense, but what happens down the line when the government, any government, not just China, as you said, this is all coming. It's coming to Serbia. It's coming to Croatia. It's coming to the EU. The EU is totalitarian, and so what happens when in 5 years, 10 years time, I say something they don't like and they deploy a robot to come and get me, or just block my payment processing. So sure, it's secure and comfortable for the masses who just shut up and keep their heads down. But I just can't be down with that. I prefer less, I guess, security and more freedom. This is all alien to me, Nikola. It's freaking me out.
I get your point, but you probably know that's what we had in the socialist Yugoslavia. So the system was pretty good for the majority of the people, except for those dissidents. So you were allowed to do anything basically, but to criticize the government, the regime. And I think from the global perspective, I think that's what will be. That's what will happen in the whole world at a certain point. I think it's inevitable, not because someone wants to impose some kind of dictatorship, but because it's a historical process. So that happened in the past in ancient Rome, in Greece previously, and in other civilizations, and it will happen in the West as well. So I think it's just a matter of time.
Well, I think it is a historical process, but I think it is also someone does want to implement a global totalitarian regime. And, I was in China exactly 20 years ago, and I used cash. Like back in those days, none of this, what you're talking about, existed. So I remember a China where I exchanged, I had physical cash and used it. And It's odd that you mentioned about, it feels like yesterday, but it was 4 years ago, almost to the, a little over 4 years that I left Kazakhstan. And when I was in Kazakhstan, I used cash primarily, except for the taxis. Or even then I may have used cash, but it was strange because 4 years ago, that's a testament to how quickly this is accelerating, because I was using only cash. I remember getting it, and cash was used by everyone a lot in Kazakhstan. And so things probably have changed. Let me ask you about Central Asia real quick. From a geopolitical perspective, you've been going around Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. What is most important for you, when it comes to the global geopolitics of the West and the East? The pipelineistan, as Pepe Escobar would say. Well, what's important for us to know about Central Asia when it comes to China, Russia, West, energy, geopolitics, and so forth?
And so first, let me just point out, so from that perspective, cash versus credit cards. And so in Kazakhstan, so when I was there last month or a couple of months ago, and then us foreign journalists, we went to a restaurant. We were the only persons there using cash. All locals were using not credit cards, but local apps for payment. So I think from that perspective, Kazakhstan is closer to China than to Russia, because it is also a highly digitalized society. And as you might recall, I wrote an article on that last year when I interviewed the former Kazakh Minister for Digitalization for the Geopolitics and Empire. So unlike Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, which is China's neighbor, is totally different. There you cannot use credit cards at all, not to mention those apps. They just don't exist. It's a completely cash-based society. I mean, they have those terminals for credit cards, but they just don't work. They just accept only cash. So it's totally different. And Chinese influence in that country is very strong. China built a parliament in Dushanbe, parliament building, and is also involved in various other projects. But I spoke with their foreign ministry officials, and they told me that they wanted to do business with the West, with the European Union, but they said that the EU expects them to follow some ridiculous rules and bureaucratic procedures. So they just gave up on that, and they want to do business with China and Russia. So that country, I think, is still in Russia's geopolitical orbit, and Russia's influence there is also still strong, and the population remains loyal to Russia, and I would say about 50% of them or so support Russia's actions in Ukraine, which is not the case in Kazakhstan, for instance, or in some other Central Asian countries. And so Russia also has a military base in Tajikistan, and the problem for that country is that it does not have a strong industry at all. So it's dependent on the imports. So when I go to those countries, to any country, basically, I want to go to a market or to a store to see how people live. And that's what I noticed, that political analysts and journalists and directors of various institutes, and so they don't pay attention to those details. Like they focus mostly on analysis that they read and speeches they listen to, but they don't pay attention to the everyday life. And when you go to a store, then you can see what kind of products that country has and where those products come from. So in Tajikistan, I noticed that the country imports basically everything, very few local products. And when I went to their exhibition of the Tajik economy, I realized that they mostly produce fruits and vegetables, no industry. And that's a big problem for the country. So a lot of Tajiks go to Russia to work there because they don't see, they don't have much work to do in their homeland. And I found it interesting that a lot of people are happy working in Chinese plants operating in Tajikistan, which is not the case, for instance, here in Serbia. They prefer to work for Western companies, not for the Chinese. In Kazakhstan, it's totally different because that country is pretty Westernized, although it preserves its own culture, just like Tajikistan. Tajikistan is, from that perspective, a very traditional society. Most people still live in villages. In Kazakhstan, that's not the case, but they want to preserve their own tradition. The Kremlin is not satisfied with that, especially with the fact that they want to strengthen the role of the Kazakh language. So the Russians would prefer Kazakhs to continue talking in Russian, which I understand, but I understand Kazakhs as well, because after all, it's their native language. But generally, I think the European Union is seeking to strengthen its positions in Kazakhstan, also in other Central Asian states, but in Kazakhstan primarily because of critical raw materials that country has. The Kremlin is not doing much to preserve that country in its sphere of influence. That's my impression. So I don't think Kazakhstan will follow Armenia's path and leave the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Well, Armenia is still nominally a member of that organization, but it's not participating in any drills, or it's not even paying any. It's not paying the membership in that organization. So it's part of the CSTO on paper, but in reality, no. Kazakhstan seeks to preserve good relations with Russia, also with China, and also to strengthen its cooperation with the European Union, which is all part of its so-called multi-vector foreign policy. When I spoke with them, they told me that they simply have no other option but to do that, because they have two giant neighbors, one China and one Russia. And they simply see the West as a counterbalance to those two powers, which is why they're trying to increase their cooperation with the West. So, from my perspective, it makes sense. Other Central Asian nations are not all of them have significant natural resources. Tajikistan, for instance, does not. It has water resources, but not oil, gas, and coal like Kazakhstan. But Turkmenistan does. It's a very rich country in terms of natural resources, but you probably notice that it does not sell its energy to Europe, but only to China and sometimes to Russia. It's very interesting. I think in the future it will have to begin selling energy to the EU, but now China is its primarily market. And then you have Kyrgyzstan. It's an energy poor country. I don't see any significant battle for influence in that state. Unlike in Uzbekistan, that it's pretty much the same as in Kazakhstan. The European Union and the United States also they seek to increase their presence there. So that region is strategically important. So and I always point that out. So if Russia suffers a defeat in Ukraine, all those countries will turn their back on Moscow, and then they will try to find another sponsor or another ally, however you want to portray it. And it remains to be seen if that will be China or the West. I think China, because of geography. Geography plays an important role here.
Strategic relocation. So for the listeners out there, some of who consult with me, if you're looking to escape the technocracy, to escape the algorithm ghetto, the Great Reset, Tajikistan. There you go. There's a new suggestion. Go to Tajikistan. I'll recommend Mongolia. If I was a single man, I would be in Mongolia right now. You can disappear into the Gobi, into the steppe. No one will know where you are, and you can live analog. You just gotta get used to the cold. I don't mind the minus 30, minus 40, minus 50 degree weather. So there's a suggestion. A final topic, Nikola, we're covering the waterfront here. Serbia, lithium mines, protests. What's the most interesting? What's happening in Serbia right now?
As you said, lithium. Yeah. So the point is that the European Union reportedly does not want to depend on China when it comes to lithium. So it found a country that has significant lithium reserves, and that country is Serbia. And now they seek to begin extracting lithium. And the vast majority of the Serbian population opposes such plans because it would cause significant problems for the environment. And that's why we had a series of protests in this country, not only in Belgrade, but in other cities and towns too. But I don't think those protests are particularly successful. Actually, I don't think they are successful at all, because the government is using the same pattern that other governments are using when they want to, well, not to crack down on protests, but they want protests simply to disappear one way or another. So I saw that in Armenia, for instance. People in Armenia came out to the streets protesting because their government decided to reach a deal, peace deal with Azerbaijan. The Armenian population opposes such plans. And then they organized mass protests in Yerevan and in other cities too, especially after Armenia agreed to return some 4 strategically important villages to Azerbaijan. And that's when protests broke out, but they were pointless because there was no strategy, no nothing. They were just, people came out to the streets protesting, walking, and that's it, no action. Then in Georgia, for instance, you had a situation that's slightly different, but essentially the same, because people protested against the so-called Russian law. Now, the authorities in Georgia would say that it's the American law. That's the law on foreign NGOs. And there were violent protests in Georgia, but they were also unsuccessful because the law was adopted by the Georgian parliament and they couldn't prevent it. So yeah, they were fighting against police forces, but still, the law is still there. So no results. And in Serbia, the authorities just ignore the protests. They allow people to come out to the streets and protest, but there is no action. I don't think it's happening by chance, but I think there are some deals between the organizers or those protests and the government, because the situation that we have in this country is pretty unique. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić is firmly backed by all major powers operating in this region. He's backed by the United States, the European Union, Russia, and China, and also significant parts of the Serbian population. It's interesting, by the way, that Russia supports him, because Serbia arms Ukraine, sells weapons to Ukraine. It sold reportedly $800 million worth of weapons to Ukraine through third countries. And the Kremlin does absolutely nothing about it. Actually, a day before that large protests in Belgrade, Maria Zakharova openly supported Vučić. And she described that protest indirectly as some kind of Western plot against him. So we have a Western corporation called Rio Tinto, where, by the way, China has Chinese corporation is also a significant shareholder. So that corporation is expected to begin exploiting lithium in this country, and the Kremlin supports that, which is very interesting. And the government here does not do anything to nothing that would have an impact on its relations with the EU, which is why I think that lithium will be exploited in this country in the near future, in 4 years or so. I think it's inevitable now. It just remains to be seen who will do that, if it will be Rio Tinto or someone else. But I'm generally very pessimistic when it comes to the future of Serbia. I think that that lithium extraction could have a severe impact on the environment in this country. But I think that's part of the agenda and part of the deal that our government signed with the European Union, especially with Germany, because it is Germany that needs Serbian lithium, and they openly said that. Although Germany itself has lithium reserves, but they don't want to extract it because they're quite aware that it can have a negative impact on the environment. But why would they care? I mean, they can exploit it here in Serbia. Yeah, so it's not that Rhine and other German rivers will be polluted, but Serbian rivers and maybe rivers in Bulgaria and Romania. But why would they care about it? Yeah, I think it's a matter of time because before certain corporations, whether Rio Tinto or someone else, begins doing that dirty job. Yeah, I guess here in Serbia we have to sacrifice ourselves for the European Union so that people living in the EU can drive electric vehicles and have clean air. So we have to live in a polluted country in a dump.
That good old Balkan cynicism, that Serbian, the Croatian, Bosnian cynicism. With it, you will see the world more clearly. You'll be more accurately be able to diagnose the not war in Ukraine, the algorithm ghetto, everything else. So we've got a plus there, Nikola, with our Balkan cynicism. We've covered a lot. I love your analysis. Again, I think that the best places people can find you are on X and your Telegram as well. If people use Telegram, subscribe to Nikola there. Where anywhere else that we can find you?
Well, that's all at this point. I don't use any other social networks. So former Twitter, now X and Telegram, although I'm more active on X or Twitter.
And your articles are posted there as well. So, maybe see you next year sometime in Croatia or Serbia next time. Next time I make it out there, I will be hanging out. So thanks again for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.